Hi, welcome back to another episode of Minds Behind Maps. I'm Maxim Lunneman, and this is the fourth episode in this experiment I'm trying, where I want to sit down with the people who are creating and using anything geospatial to try to understand more about the field and the people in it. This time I sat down with Aravind Ravichandran to talk about his work as an independent consultant, how the Earth observation field is situated globally, and Aravind was nice enough to take some time to give me some context around the geospatial market in India, of which I'm a little bit ashamed to say I know very little about. I've been following Aravind's podcast and the writing he's done for a little while now, and we've had the chance to chat a few times in the past, where he was able to answer some of my very naive questions around SPACs and just everything going on right now with so many space companies going public. We didn't touch much on this time, but I took a lot away from this conversation. I find it quite satisfying to get to understand the whole geospatial field more through conversations like these with people like Aravind. We talk about his background as a software developer and how that was helpful in his current work in consulting, and he also shares some thoughts about how the whole EO market is changing and where it might be going in the next few years. As someone still relatively new in this industry, I find these types of conversation helpful in understanding the industry from a larger scale, or at the very least I have the feeling that I might be understanding it. Dunning and Kruger might have a little bit of a frown if they were hearing that. Either way, I hope you find this conversation interesting. Before getting started, I would like to spend a bit of time recommending Arvind's podcast, TerraWatch Space. As I've learned quite a bit from listening to his conversations with different people from the space industry. I kind of like the motto, demystifying the space industry. I entered this field through the fanboy gates, people really being into it, with everybody around me having either a fighter jet, an old World War II airplane, and a space shuttle as their laptop wallpaper, of which I was also very guilty. That was really great, but I think it also led to some unrealistic and maybe not critical enough views of the whole space industry. So for me, listening to Arvind's podcast has in part been really interesting to listen to because I've gotten to listen to some conversations that tended to go away from that and more analyze the field for what it more truly is, the potential it has, and just leaving aside the whole coolness aspect. I'll put some links to his podcast in the show notes as usual. Also, as usual, please feel free to send me an email at minds.behind.maps@gmail.com if there's anything you'd like to say, or you can also reach out to me directly on Twitter where I'm at Max Lunneman. With all that said, here's my conversation with Aravind Ravichandran. Hi, welcome to the podcast. It's nice to have you. I just, like all the time, I just want to start by asking you to just, I'd like to ask you how you would describe yourself.
Great. Oh, that's a difficult question to start. But first up, thanks, Max, for having me on the podcast. How would I describe myself? I think I'm still finding myself, but I don't know if that's going to, stop at one place. But as you've seen from my career, it's been going in different directions. So I don't know if I have completely found myself, but at least what I can say is I've found what I want to be doing, or what industry to be working on, and I've kind of settled on that. Let's say for the last 4 years, with kind of a similar role. So I'm a consultant in the space industry. I work predominantly in the Earth observation sector. Not only, but I also work with other clients in different parts of space, from launchers to satellite communications to space exploration. So I worked on a bunch of different things, but if you have to, let's say, put it in short, I would say consultant in the Earth observation sector and the wider space industry. That's, let's say, the one-liner. But, just on top of that, I'm not a huge fan of, defining people by what they do. So, that's also something I've been thinking about quite a bit, is why do we always have to define everyone by their profession? Why do we need to be
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, consultant, software engineer, data scientist, or Max is a data scientist. But, I think that kind of makes us less human and just more professional. I think I would probably want to live in a world where we just don't define ourselves in one word or one sentence of what we do in terms of work. But yeah, we kind of need to, go back to how the world works, and for the world, that's kind of who I am.
Yeah, that's why I just try to ask that question like that, because I'm also not expecting any answer. I'm not expecting you to tell me, oh, I'm a consultant. If we want to go down that road, that's fine. But if you also want to tell me you're a, hobbyist baker, that's fine as well, because I agree. Our profession is not what defines ourselves. It's, at the end of the day, it's a lot of us do it because that's what brings in the money. But you don't always do what you want. And sometimes you just need to do it to get the money. So I'm also fine if you're a hobbyist baker. That's just all I'm trying to say.
Okay. Well, then I'd like to say um, a harmonica player in progress.
Nice. I'm gonna linger on. If I'm gonna put that in the title of the episode, that could be pretty fun.
Oh yeah, my God, that's a lot of pressure to kind of keep up with my practice that I started recently. But yeah.
Okay, nice. And so I like the way you phrased it about like you seem to be still looking for it, but you found at least a field that still seems to be very wide about space, not just Earth observation. Um, could you tell me a bit more about, first of all, what makes you say that you think you found that, and why specifically this field?
Sure. In terms of, what I've done in the past, I've worked in software, and
Mm-hmm.
when I was in my previous job, or the job that I had 5-6 years ago now, it was a job in the software industry. And when I joined them, I thought, they were doing something great. Well, they are. I think they're still doing something great. But I just thought, thought that in terms of software, I don't want to call it that software has reached a saturation point, but it seems like a lot of what we're doing with software. I'm not talking about the AI side of things, but just the apps. Because I was working for a company that was selling something to do with apps, a solution that helps apps. I just figured that, what, this is kind of a sailboat in terms of what is there to do. I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
there are things to change and, innovations to do, but then I was not getting the feeling that I was working on a big problem,
Okay.
and I thought that I needed to make a change. And I've been, let's say, a space enthusiast, not a huge space enthusiast. As you may know, I've not seen Star Trek or Star Wars. I've not played Kerbal Space Program, so I wouldn't call myself a space enthusiast. But I've been following up on developments. Did I see the SpaceX launch in 2016? Yes, I did. When it recovered its first booster, and I was also kind of, because I was in Europe, keeping track of what Europe was up to. And I just thought that, what, the best industry that I can work in terms of having the biggest impact, even though ironically it's very hard to translate space having the biggest impact, because as you might imagine, it's very hard to communicate. People don't see the link. I just saw that that's the industry that I can work in with the most impact. So I decided to make the plunge. And part of that reason also tends to be Interstellar. When I saw Interstellar, I was the only one from the whole of the audience who actually took a course to understand the movie. So,
Wow.
and I went to did the course, and then a couple of weeks back, I went inside again in the theaters, and I just realized that, what, I was the only one who did that. So maybe I should take it seriously. And then, that was there in the back of my mind. And then I joined this job. Yeah. And then I figured out that space industry was where I want to be in terms of having an impact. And then when I got into the space industry, obviously, I mean, could I have been a rocket scientist or, an exoplanet expert, which honestly, I thought I could be, but then I realized, you know what, I need to make so many changes to what I know, that I wanted to kind of, take a look at what I can do, knowing what I know. I worked in software. Yes, I could do programming, and yes, I did work on the business side of software. So I just realized that I needed to focus on something that I can actually excel at. So yeah, I joined a consulting company, PwC at that time, and as I was figuring out, let's say, the space industry, I just figured out that Earth observation is a field that, at least from my point of view, as you might have seen or read, what I say is I just consider it as another type of data. And I thought,
Right.
you know what, I think that's where I can apply my skills to the best extent, more so than exploration or launch or anything to do with it. So that's kind of why I decided to go, let's say, deep down into Earth observation, while still, being on the space front without going too much into the data side of things. Because one of the reasons I left my first job was because I had enough of programming, and I
Okay.
just didn't think I wanted to do it more. So I could have gone into, if I wanted to, continue my programming side, I could have gone into Earth observation and decided that I wanted to do, become like you, a data scientist. I could have, because I worked with Python before, although I was not a remote sensing expert. I still knew that, as a software engineer, I still have something to contribute. But I decided to, be on both the space side and the Earth observation side, and only consulting could let me do that. So that's kind of how I ended up doing what I'm doing now.
Right.
I hope that kind of got back to the question and I answered it.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I do want to say you got to try out Kerbal Space Program. Like if you took a course to understand Interstellar, you probably love that game. um, and
Yeah, I
then
just think that, I'm not a big gamer. I used to play games, and maybe I shouldn't consider that a game, and maybe I should consider that something else. But yeah, no, I will try it out sometime, hopefully.
yeah, I'm a bit biased on that though, but I owe a lot to that game. But it's really interesting to hear that. Also because I just wasn't expecting that. And I actually discovered quite recently that you had a software background. Um, so I did want to ask, like, if you wanted to do you miss that side a bit? But it feels like you're saying you're quite happy that that's behind you. But do you feel like that's helping you in the job that you're doing now? That seems to be more on the consulting side, and at least from the way I understand it, which is a bit bigger picture focused. Do you think having been kind of hands-on, do you think that helps you towards that? And maybe in what way, if it does or if it doesn't? I'd be quite curious to hear you on that.
Well, definitely. I mean, I think it does give me an edge, because if to be honest, I think it's one of the reasons why I got the job at PwC when I did
Mm-hmm.
get the job was, anyone who's a consultant could have just gotten into the space practice team that I was working in, and could have just become the Earth observation, I would say, consultant in that team. But then they were looking for somebody who could, understand the technicalities of it. Because if you just are, or somebody who knows the space side of things, that's great. But then if you want to actually understand the world after space in Earth observation, you need to kind of understand a little bit. Cloud is not just a buzzword anymore. AI is not just a buzzword anymore, and algorithm is just not a buzzword anymore. So
Mm.
they wanted someone, and honestly, yeah, I do think that it does give me an advantage in terms of understanding the problems with Earth observation today. Like, why is it so hard to for people to get Earth observation data? Why is it so hard for them to use Earth observation data? And a lot of the, let's say, challenges in EO are not, well, there are some technical challenges, but then a lot of them are software challenges. You need to have an interface where you can task a satellite. Great, but most of it is software building. You want to have a platform where you can access different types of data to work with. That's again a software problem. At the end of the day, the backend data is coming from space, but overall, I just see EO as a data that you can build a software product with. So it's a product that like you're sitting now, we sit in front of a computer and we use. At the end, that's where that's what Earth observation data boils to. So yeah, I think that having a software background, I think that's kind of what helped me understand and, let's say, write what I'm writing. Whether people agree or disagree, and sometimes I think what I write is too simplistic and just very high level, but at least the software background is what lets me stay on that high level and give a perspective like that. So yeah, overall I think it's very good. I would have liked to let's say spend more time understanding a little bit more, because I can. So I did play around with data a little bit in the initial days, trying to develop a flood monitoring algorithm, I think. And yeah, I tried to do a little bit of this and that, but then I figured out, what, I don't want to do that anymore. So I'll stick to the consulting side. But yeah, no, it definitely gives me an edge.
And you mentioned that you were staying high level. Do you see yourself maybe going a bit deeper into the analysis that you're doing on just the things that you're writing, the things that you're talking about? Do you see yourself going down deeper, just talking specifically about the tech? Because as you're saying, these words like cloud, AI, all that stuff, it's very high level, and it's also very important. But there is a lot of talk that does happen at high level, but you can go very deep into it as well and try to explain why Amazon doing AWS a certain way has a big impact. Do you see yourself going down that road as well?
Well, it's a good question. It's a question that I've been, let's say, asking myself, because there's only so much I can do at this level. What I'm doing now is I work with startups when they go to market, for instance, try to build their business model, and do market analysis and advise investors and all that. That's kind of what I do today. But then it gets monotonous. I can advise different startups. I can work with different investors. I can do different types of, let's say, market reports and market maps, but it does get monotonous. So it's a question that I've been asking myself, because and I can understand. It's not that I need to put in the effort to understand, but if I did not have that background, I would have to put in 2 or 3 times more the effort. But with my background, I can just, get in and understand easily. So for me, it's just a question of, do I make the decision and go all in? I don't know. I will have to think about it, and I think you will find out in the next few months. If I get into a job, and depending on what kind of job it is, you will find out what kind of decisions I've made. But yeah, no, it's something that I've been asking myself, and I have definitely a understanding to even just even being in a consultant. Even if I had to be a consultant, I could be a different type of consultant, helping companies, not just telling them what data to use, what kind of companies exist, what are the use cases of EO, which is what I do today, which is still interesting, because companies that come to me are like companies that have no clue about EO, agriculture company that has nothing to do with EO, and what I do for them is tell them what EO can do for them. What are the different players in Earth observation, types of data? They can buy data, they can buy product, they can buy analytics. And I can go one step more if I make the decision, and I can actually help them kind of adopt it internally. So even with being a consultant, I can go one level deeper. But yeah, I'll make the decision, and I think you will see.
I guess that's a nice problem to have, to be uh, working with people who don't know anything about EO. I think that's a big topic that you've written quite a bit about, and is starting to hear a lot about, is people saying you need to get out the EO bubble. And I'm guessing if people come to you and say, hey, we don't know anything about this, but could it be useful for us? But feels like that's already one step in the right direction from there.
No, definitely. I mean, it's again something that happened, let's say, serendipitously, because I was not looking actively for these opportunities, but then I just had these kind of, let's say, requests in the past few months, and it's let's say more rewarding than just doing a market report or working with an investor and telling to invest in a company or not. This is, I saw that becoming actionable for a company where they actually went ahead and decided to do something with EO within their company, and they had not used EO much within their company. They've heard about it, but they haven't done much, because one of those companies is let's say a biotech company that is working with plant seeds. They don't know anything about EO. I don't think, it's not even their main function, but they know that, oh, you know what, we can actually see the impact of our plant phenotypes by monitoring them from space to see, which part of the field is performing, how it's being affected. And these are all, very simple use cases for the EO world. But then for them, it's great. And, working in those kind of assignments, actually, gives one a much better reward than working on other market related strategy assignments. So it does seem like it's going in a good direction. And also, as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons I joined PwC was one, to do consulting for ESA and for companies in the space industry. And another reason that I joined PwC was they were developing, or we were developing together a solution called Insights from Space, which was basically a framework. It's not really a product, but it's more like a framework to help companies understand how to use Earth observation data, because PwC has all the clients in the world. Whatever industry you're talking about, they have the clients in the world. So the framework we were developing was what are the problems that clients have where Earth observation data can play a part. We are, advising a company on how to increase their revenues, and let's say it's an insurance company or an oil and gas company. For an oil and gas company, a project that we worked on was, where to position their petrol stations. That's again contributing to PwC's assignment was, how do you increase your revenues? And EO data can play an indirect part there. You can position your petrol stations in the right place. I don't know if that's sustainable, because you need to say that, because it's not there are some ethical conundrums there. But if you are an electric charging company, just to go on the other side, where's the best place to put the electric charging station? Do you want to put it in a neighborhood where there's a lot of movement? You look at the buildings where there are higher buildings by altitude versus flat buildings. You'd probably want to put that in an area where there's a lot of high rise, because that that's an area where there's a lot of electric cars. So these are the kind of assignments I wanted to be working on a lot more. It did happen, but not as much, and it didn't work out for various reasons. So it was a path that I did start when I did start in Earth observation a few years ago, but now it's actually happening with a few assignments, so it's kind of nice.
Right, that sounds pretty cool. I can totally get that. One of the things that I think about when I hear that, and this might be starting to take devil's advocate role here, but is we and I mean you, me, and people in this field, we have this hammer that's Earth observation, and we're trying to find nails to hit stuff with. How do you think we also start turning the tables, or or have they already started turning, where we turn it into something where people realize like this is the thing that they need, rather than people in the field saying you need this to solve your problem? Or first of all, do you think that's already happening or not? And I tend to have the point of view that it's still not quite there, and I do wonder how we might get it towards that direction.
No, it's a good point, and excuse me. The way I see this is, that's why I mentioned consulting, because that's where I see, that's how historically it's been done.
Okay.
Especially if you want to get EO to big places and big names, it happens through consulting. Companies are getting digitally transformed because of consulting companies. Companies are using cloud because of consulting.
Right.
So I tend to argue that, or at least that's the hypothesis that we had when I was at PwC, was consulting and play a huge part. Because what I've noticed is, you're right, companies and, people outside, let's say the EO bubble, have no idea what EO can do for them. And that's why, I wrote about evangelism a little bit, and I compared to how Apple evangelized the Mac back then. And I mean, we don't have to, repeat history and, do the same things all over, but it's important to evangelize. And I've spoken to a couple of customers who I'm working with, and they were curious about Earth observation data, and they were trying to understand, but the point is there was nobody, for them to tell them, basically, this is how Earth observation data is. This is how you can buy. You can use open data. You can use commercial data. This is how it's going to cost. Sometimes you need to do that. If your need is so, if your need is so much, you will do your own job. Meaning, let's say take an insurance as an example. They have historically recognized the importance of satellite data. So if there are improvements in the availability of Earth observation data from satellites, they will make their own homework, and they will make their own, let's say, acquisition strategies of how they want to go about. But then there are some industries which are non-traditional users of Earth observation data. Let's take financial services, investment banks, and wealth management. You see BlackRock saying, "Oh, we want to decarbonize our portfolio." As people in EO, we know that EO can play a small part. Well, as long as you admit it's one of many solutions, because it's not going to be the one solution. That's a very bad way of, let's say, evangelizing, saying, come to us and we'll solve everything for you, which is probably not going to be the case. But even if we know that EO can play a small part for financial services firms, we have to do the job of, or someone needs to be the bridge.
Right.
Basically, I'm trying to say that I'm trying to make money out of being the bridge today, especially for these 2-3 companies that I'm helping. Maybe if somebody wants, they can also be the bridge. But long term, I don't know if this is going to be the only way, because the industry also needs to do that, because this is not sustainable. Let's say there are hundreds of me, and we are working with some companies, but a lot of industries can use EO. So we need to have companies developing products in the way that people would want to use, attending conferences, presenting them, not EO conferences, companies and conferences outside EO, and then basically finding out, that we have this product, how do you want to use it? And, trying to be a little more collaborative with them. It seems like today it's very one directional, and, just coming from the EO world. And it needs to be a little more collaborative. I'm not saying that's not happening. I think it started to happen quite a lot, more so than when I got in, where a lot of people were just surprised that, oh, satellite data can do this, and they were just, I could see just people being surprised with OpenStreetMaps, like, oh my god. And you just do a very simple visualization of where things are, and if there's like I remember an insurance client we were showing it to, And they were just like, oh my god, so you can actually count the number of buildings which were affected by floods, for during whatever hurricane season. And they were actively surprised. So we need to kind of go to them and co-develop products with them. I don't think I think that's kind of, let's say, my controversial point of view is it's not great to just develop a product and then go sell it to them. You need to go and co-develop the product together with them.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to just say, this is our solution, we have developed the product, and use it and integrate it into whatever business workflow we have. I don't think it shows open-mindedness from our side. If we want this to be adopted, we need to kind of get it to their level, and if they see the point, they'll definitely adopt.
I think also what you're describing seems to me like a very common software problem about like someone outside being blown away by something that is very easy to do and then having unrealistic expectation about what is hard. I think there's a great XKCD comic where it's, someone takes a picture of a bird and the client's like, oh, I just want to know where the image was taken. And they're like, yeah, 2 hours, we can query the location and plot the lat long. And it's like, and we also want to know the species of the bird. And it's like, well, I'm going to need a team of 20 people and 2 years to build a ML model. So I also wanted to ask that related to Earth observation, have you seen, you mentioned that example of OSM, OpenStreetMap. Have you seen other things where people have different expectations about what is possible and what isn't? I'm thinking because it's also one of those fields, especially when you start adding artificial intelligence and all that stuff on top of it. I think there's a bit of a fantasy in the general public when you watch movies as well, where you can track in real time someone on a satellite image and what they're doing right now. Do you see that transfer to people having expectations that are out of scope, or rather like people kind of know what to expect?
I don't think people know what to expect at all.
Okay.
They are coming in with an open mind. A lot of times, that's what I've seen. I think that's the majority of, let's say, assignments that I've worked on where people were interested to explore. They had a problem in mind, sometimes or most cases, that they wanted to see if EO can solve, because they kind of have a logical idea of what you can do from satellites. But then when I walk in, they still come in with an open mind and still expect to know realistically what is possible, because obviously, I used to work in sales before, so I know how you get a customer call. You try to sell, you send videos and case studies, and then you get them into a call. And obviously these case studies and videos are all flashy, to put it simply. And they because you need to get the call, so you do whatever you can to do it, and then that includes flashy videos and case studies with just high level details, not having the realistic take in it. And then during the meeting you show them, and then finally when it gets to how do you get this implemented, and that's when they understand, oh my god, okay, so you can't completely automate it. You need to manually do this initially, the pilot project. And so if you do the pilot project algorithm, can you extend it to globally? No, you can't, because you need to still keep training the model. And and then that's when they realistically understand. I think that's true of any sales strategy or in any industry. So it's not the the big point. The point is for them to understand the post integration, what happens, what is the effort involved from the Earth observation side, in terms of getting this across so that they can actually solve their problem, and then in their side, how much do they need to pay? I don't think those two, let's say, sides have met in the best way possible yet. We are still trying to find out, because to be fair, this is a very, very early industry. I know that people keep telling me, I receive a lot of comments, let's put it that way, that, I write about Earth observation as it's a new thing. It's been around for decades. I get that, but then now is when it's actually trying to go commercial. So, when I say it's the time now, and, I write about iPhone moment, whatever it is, it's because it's the age of commercial EO. And in commercial EO, you need to think about all this, as I would argue a software company does. You need to have a scalable business model. You need to have a scalable product. It's not about doing a project with Earth observation data, which has been going on for decades. Don't get me wrong, we've solved a lot of problems, as I have seen. I've not been in the industry, but I've seen and I talked to people that they have used EO data a lot in the past, but that's not how you can apply it now, and that's not how you can become a multi-billion-dollar industry. We keep hearing that. So for that to happen, you need to think about all this. What kind of problem are we solving? What is the operational cost of implementing EO within their within their workflow? Because if they're trying to solve one problem and they're ready to pay you, fair enough. But then if you want to be a scalable company receiving recurring revenues, we need to think about all that. And but to be fair, we are still in early stage. So my argument for we need to think about ourselves as a SaaS model may not even apply, because we will probably create our own model. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, that's a great
historically point. Historically, that's how it's worked. Maybe we shouldn't look into history far too much. And I've seen that with investors. The first thing investors ask me when I'm doing due diligence for a startup, it could be an Earth observation startup, is, what do you think its recurring revenue is? And that's the most important thing they've looked at in the past for a software startup. What is the margin? You asked about the technical part. I cannot tell them, because in software world, the margins used to be 50-60%, and the products don't need to be customized at all. It's like 95% no customization, any software product you look at. But then you come to EO, is if you sell it to one customer, can you really sell it to another customer just like that with 90% customization? Maybe not. So investors are also not ready for that. They are like, for them, unless you are a EO investor, your alternative investment is a SaaS company or yet another, food delivery app, which probably gives them more, let's say, return than an EO company. So I kind of get their point of why they wouldn't invest so much. But again, it's all changing. So hopefully we will, let's say, evolve into a new model in the future.
Do you think the SaaS is also the reason why there's like been so much investment coming in, of like, maybe this is like the next big thing, and so you should invest in it, expecting those high returns as SaaS, but that just might not be there? Is that one of the reasons why, at least to me, it seems like so much investment is coming in, not just in EO, to be fair, it's the whole space industry, because it's great to have data, but you need satellites, you need launchers, you need ground infrastructure. Like it's just the tip of the iceberg. EO is like the last application layer of the whole space industry, with probably telecommunications and satcoms as well. But do you think it's also because there's that expectation that so much investment is starting to go there?
Yes and no, but because there are some investors who know what they're signing up for when they invest into an Earth observation startup. It's also how the startup brands itself. I have worked with companies in Earth observation who highlight a lot of space in their pitch and their websites. And then I worked with Earth observation startups or seen them. They don't even mention them sometimes, or it's mentioned in passing. And you can see by the way they operate and the kind of returns they generate as well, because that's kind of how I did a mapping of the different parts of the Earth observation industry, and those are the companies that I put in the application layer, because they don't even call themselves Earth observation companies or space companies. They just, whatever vertical they're operating in, that's what they are after. But coming back to your question, I see a lot of investors actually asked me, one investor asked me, this company calls itself SaaS, and they they ask me to verify. For SaaS companies, you have a few metrics, annual recurring revenues, project customization, how much do they customize. And when I did the assessment and they saw it, it didn't fit into the SaaS model. But, this company called itself a SaaS company. So, you can call something SaaS, but then is it actually SaaS? Is it actually so easy? Those are all things that's why I said maybe we will evolve with our own way of doing things, because we're not going to be a software. We're not going to be a Zoom or I'm not able to think of a SaaS product off the top of my head.
There might be something like intelligence as a service or information as a service, because that really is what it underlyingly is about. It's about providing an answer to a question, compared to something like Uber or Zoom, like you mentioned, where or a lot of other software as a service, where it really is a service. It's like, oh, we're going to make this easier for you. Zoom makes calling, Google finding a question, an answer, sorry, plus all the bunch of other stuff they do. Whereas like it feels like it's more like software is just, we do that because that's just the way the world is right now. It's like everything is online, so software tends to be the way to do it. But really, it could be a text message. If that text message has all the information that you need at the right time, that could be immensely valuable. And so do you think maybe that could be the direction to go for, like IaaS, information as it sounds terrible.
No, but that's kind of how I called it in one of my posts, and kind of became a thing. I called it Insights as a Service. It's also IaaS, and yeah, it's kind of the way it's heading. I think that's kind of where we will settle on, because in my, let's say, my stack, Insights as a Service is just below software as a service. Not every company can become a software as a service company, and the best example that I can think of is Tomorrow.io, or they were called Clamacell before.
Yep.
And they were a weather company who had a software product, and they decided to launch satellites and generate Earth observation data so that they can use it themselves in their software and keep continuing their SaaS model. But today's Earth observation companies, I don't know if they can get there, if they can become so vertically integrated and go so much into the one specific problem, because they're doing a bunch of things, but especially if you're looking at a satellite operator, that's a whole different ballgame. And I don't know if they can go, so much into, generating analytics, find out what you're doing, object detection, change detection, and then convert it into an insight, and then develop a product with a software model. So maybe they will stop at the insights level. And yeah, a lot of companies that we, call EO companies today kind of fall into the Insights as a Service model across different verticals. But yeah, no, that's kind of where I think a lot of companies tend to end up with. And the only, let's say, hypothesis that I had a few months ago was, why stop at Insights as a Service? Because there are companies that already use software products like an SAP or an Oracle or an IBM that they use today in their day-to-day processes. So these Insights as a Service companies can go and integrate with them, instead of saying, buy my software product and get an alert every time there is a vegetation that is, going into the railway tracks. A company already uses, SAP or an Oracle for this, for recording the, so they can just, be an integrator into those software companies. So that's kind of, one possibility of that evolving, because not everybody wants to buy 5, 10, 20 different type of subscriptions. If you're a company,
yeah,
if you were to just integrate with what they have, it's life easy for you, and makes it easy again from a customer standpoint, because you don't need to go and integrate with their infrastructure and generate that text message. You can do it, but then they do it differently today with an SAP. You better integrate with an SAP if you just be a backend solution, as you can even be white labeled on the back end of their software. But yeah, I think that's kind of one way of doing about it. And Esri provides a nice, let's say, platform for people to go and integrate with. That's why you see so
Yeah.
many Earth observation companies getting integrated into it, and that's for the geospatial world. And for the software world, I think this is kind of how it can happen. But come 2030, we may see an Earth observation company being the core software for a lot of companies. You never know. That's a nice world to imagine.
Yeah, for sure. I do feel like it's still very undecided or like uncertain about. There's this. I think you mentioned this hype cycle as well, where we're like going up and then kind of knowing where that might stabilize. One thing I find really interesting is I think if I got my dates right, in 2017, Planet actually acquired a constellation from Google, and I would have felt like it would have happened the other way around, where a company like Google, or I would say maybe Facebook, which are very centered around data, though it tends to be very individual data, would try to go down that road. Do you see maybe something where in 10 years that time frame starts reversing, where Amazon starts acquiring EO company to ingest with what they have on the ground with their ground stations, or Google saying we're going to buy back Planet, or something like that, like on the really bigger scale as well? Do you see like these huge tech companies also going towards that in the next maybe decade or so? That's like really projecting, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, I can do shameless predictions. Don't worry about that. No, so I can say, well, at least from what I can imagine, based on how these companies have operated, Google or Amazon or even Apple for that matter, they are very horizontal. So I don't know why they would actually go ahead and get into EO, but
Okay.
Tomorrow they might be actually an investment, and by the time this episode comes out, I could be wrong. But they have always been horizontal. They have tried to go vertical, like Apple has a podcasting app, Google has a music app. Even though they have other apps in their music store, they still have their own, which has become already controversial for a lot of reasons. How can you do that? And I think I can see that happening for EO the same way. They can kind of increase their capabilities so that they can cater to the widest amount of audience possible. So I can see them doing that if it helps them, cater to as many people as possible. That's how, AWS has developed over the years. They have tried to include capabilities that can be used by a lot of people. So I don't know if it makes sense for them to acquire something from a data point of view. From a mapping point of view, yeah, definitely. You can see them acquiring a company, if Apple's AR Apple's AR or self-driving cars become a big thing, and then mapping becoming super useful, I can see them acquiring a high resolution constellation operator, because that just actively feeds into their existing business. But I don't see them getting into it for the data, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't know if they want to specialize themselves into offering a data solution. They want people to use their products to build solutions with that they can make money out of. Like today, it's both Microsoft and Amazon. I think both have reached, well, Microsoft recently has reached 2 trillion, Amazon already 2 trillion. So they're making money out of it. They don't want to go and make solutions to sell to users. So I think they want to be the biggest driving force there is. And with EO, I can see them becoming interested in being the platform where, that's why I wrote about who wants to be the Android framework for EO data. They can generate so much money with it, because you're using their cloud, you're using data from their cloud, which the EO company needs to pay Amazon for. So they can make so much money. So I'm sure they'll think capitalistically and not very, let's solve this EO problem.
No, yeah, absolutely. I guess what I had in mind is I feel like actually, and I might be completely wrong, but I felt like those companies were starting to becoming a bit more vertical, with Apple making more and more of its hardware. For example, Google starting to build their own TPUs, so like a version of GPU, tailored for training their models, where they're starting to make the silicon as well that is running. And maybe that's kind of what was navigating my question. And I I have to say, I can't imagine a world where Google has been building Google Earth Engine, and yet it feels like this thing that is way underutilized in my opinion, about like, yeah, it's just a bunch of like data that's there, but you can't really do anything with it. But it's this super complicated thing that happened in the back end where we could fuse absolutely everything. I would imagine that, in 5 years, if they say, hey, you can tap into this and you can start building commercial applications on top of it. Oh, and by the way, you have access to the whole Google engine as well, not the Earth engine, but all the stuff that Google's knows. And that just ends up being there, where, geospatial is just like a tiny component of that. Um, I have to say, I kind of wouldn't be too surprised if something like that happened. But maybe you're right, where the data itself just doesn't make sense, because it's not the same value proposition that they would like to bring on the table. So I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting, but it was first of all super exciting to see all three of them kind of get into the overall space industry. I think they've all, let's say, experimented here and there, but then at least to develop offers to go all in, like Microsoft did with Azure Orbital, and then AWS with Airspace. So they seem to be bullish on it, but we have to remember that it's not the biggest factor for them. They have other big revenue generating machines, and when I think EO starts to become that, they will start to become interested. They're just
Right.
getting into the game because they need to, because it's a technology that is evolving and business model is being evolved as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they just want to be in. I don't think they're in today because it's making billions of dollars for them today,
Yeah.
but they have a hope that it will make that in the future, and it can be through whatever means. If that is the way they want to go, they go and acquire a satellite operator, or I don't think they would want to launch their own satellites, but
Mm-hmm.
if that's the way they want to go and develop products, then they will definitely go ahead and do it.
I guess I really like the analogy you had that you mentioned earlier about this iPhone moment in EO. And I think that kind of ties into that. I feel like what makes the iPhone what it is now is also the App Store. It's Apple creating this platform that, has a touch screen and has a camera and has like the gyroscope and everything. But then they didn't make the most popular game on it. And so do you think we also, like, that's also the place that has to happen towards that, about we need to create a way for other people to come in and make this killer app or apps that make it the iPhone moments of like, it's and maybe I got your point actually wrong, but to me the iPhone moment, that's what it would sound like. It's like creating that foundation so that other people can come in and say, oh, you know what, that flash that you have on your camera, we can actually leave it on and bam, you have a flashlight app. And it was never meant for that, because, well, it was meant to make like the best camera shot and everything, and just someone else thought about doing that. um, do you think we also need to start thinking like that, and or for platforms to start building like that as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's kind of where I differ from Joe Morrison a little bit on, he's not a big fan of the platforms. And I do think that
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of value in platforms, but he's coming from a different angle. But um, I do think that there needs to be investment into the platform, and how can we develop our own Android or iStore, no, Apple Store framework. Maybe it's going to evolve differently because, Apple at that time was new and people were just playing around with Apple features and coming in with their own ideas, and that became apps. But with EO, it's happening on both ends. People are developing products, and you're also developing platforms. But at the end of the day, companies that have made the most amount of revenues and solved the highest amount of problems are ones that have opened it out to people and let them play with it, as opposed to them pointing with some apps. Well, Apple did come with some basic iPhone did come with some basic apps. So maybe that's kind of the future for EO. But on that note, it's also interesting to note that there are companies that maybe not as much, which is good, because you don't want to have 25 platform companies. But I know of a couple of them, a few of them that are trying to do this. That's great. And those are also the companies that also trying to work on the problem that is very important to them, which is also important to Earth observation, is how do we normalize EO data? Things like ARD. Who are the people working on it? It's also the satellite data providers and the satellite operators, but it's very important for those platform people, because you need to kind of normalize everything in order to, before you let people in, because at the end of the day, you can't expect a platform to be open and then you realize, oh, you know what, you can't actually put an optical image from this company on top of this SAR image from this company, and then the people are going to be disappointed and leave. So that needs to be solved.
Analysis ready data,
analysis ready data. Sorry.
That's fine.
And yeah, I think that's kind of where these platform companies need to put in the most effort, keeping in mind what the end user wants. The end user wants to have an Android store-like framework where he can just come in, put 5 things together as an EO analogy from 5 different companies, and try to solve a problem that he has in mind. So that's kind of the end goal, I would imagine, where we want to get to as EO, because at the end of the day, like I mentioned, we can only solve so many problems and develop so many products, because of course there are so many Earth observation companies, both on the, let's say, the data layer. They want to solve a problem, so they are sending a satellite up, thinking that it's going to solve this problem. But then unless we open it up to people, we are not going to actually democratize, the quote unquote democratize, the word that's thrown away a lot. That's when it actually becomes democratized. And, today the democratization is happening only on a very visual level, and not on a, let's play around with different types of data and develop applications with it outside the EO community. I mean, I think within the EO community, people are already starting to play around and starting to become democratized if you can afford. But outside is when, unless people from outside use it, you're not going to become a multi-billion-dollar, because people, I like to say that I live both within and outside the bubble sometimes, because I meet people on both sides. And well, honestly, the ones outside, they don't even care. I try to evangelize to my developer friends. It's like, oh, you are working on this startup, maybe you can try and use EO data. Got a friend that I know is working on a sustainability reporting software product. I know that EO data can play a part, and I try to kind of evangelize, you can track this and that. But at the end of the day, he has his own way of working. And, those are the kind of, let's say, startups. I'm not saying he's going to become $1 billion startup. Hope he does. But that's where EO can play a lot of role, in those type of companies. And that's when it actually becomes democratized, when, those people trying to solve those kind of problems, and they can think of EO and actually go somewhere and see what EO can do, play with it, and kind of develop something that they can use. Yeah, that's where the best type of platform can do. But yeah, well, again, I am talking in a very simplistic manner. Maybe some of your listeners or even you are like, oh shit, it's very high level. Let's go one level deeper.
No. But I think, you got to start there. And then that's where, like, if you have the high level picture wrong, I think you can go in the details, but I think you went down the wrong rabbit hole. That just tends to be my opinion. So no, I'm very glad with where this is going. I actually also on that, one thing I wanted to touch upon with you is how do you see the current interaction between the public and the private kind of sector when it comes to EO? Because you mentioned that the EO field is both quite has been around for quite a while, but is also quite new. And the way I understand it, and please tell me if I got that wrong, but it's because the part of Earth observation that's been around is kind of the part of space that's been around. It's these big national or multinational projects, programs that have been done by governments, things like Roscosmos, like NASA, like ESA, like JAXA, like all these governmental programs that have led to things like MODIS, like Landsat, like Copernicus with the Sentinels. And then what is very recent are private sector companies also in the space world. I think it really started entering the world with SpaceX, and now we have a lot of EO companies like Planet, ISI, Capella, all these companies. How do you see those interactions kind of moving forward? What do you think happens in a world where everything was these not necessarily free, but at least governmental programs, to where now there's a lot of those governmental programs turning towards being free data a lot of the time, and then the private sector, gonna get that right, the private sector bringing a different value to the table. How do you see that moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good point, because I've been thinking about it in the past as well. What is the impact of these public programs? Because I've spoken to big organizations. I know they have tons of money, and the first data source they decided to use was Sentinel. So whoever you speak to, they want to start with something that's available for free. And at the end of the day, whatever you promise them, unless you're the defense, which has been the case in EO, you're not going to necessarily pay for things. You want to see what you can do with the free data, because at the end of the day, all companies want to optimize their costs. It's the world we live in. Even the richest of rich, that's how they operate, and that's how, let's say, human psychology works as well. So that's the starting point for a lot of them. What I'd like to see more is more talking between the public and private to kind of get a framework for. I think I was talking to a colleague before, and I again said it in a very high level manner, that the governments should do a lot of zoom out cases, which is, in EO terms, you can call it low resolution, but big picture stuff for industries and for sensors that make sense. And then the private companies can come in and fill the gaps. And if you want to zoom in, you can do, as a private company, high resolution or high frequency, whatever that comes in. That's kind of how it's going towards. But I'd like to see more talk between. So, the new Copernicus sensor satellite, the Sentinel satellites have been announced, or, the next generation Copernicus. I want to see in the industry talk about, okay, how can we kind of work together with that data and design our next constellation or next sensors on top of that, so that the end user can combine both of them to get his insight. I don't know if that makes sense. Because
yeah. I think what you're referring to is this concept of tip and queuing, where you might have a very high swath. So you're looking at a lot of things, but with a low resolution. And then when you see something that might be interesting, you task a higher resolution satellite to maybe take a much narrower but higher resolution image. So I think an analogy could be like, if you're on a boat or something, you're just looking around with your eyes, and when you see something that might be interesting, you start taking a scope out, which is much more focused, but also much higher resolution. So exactly. I think that's what you might be referring to.
Yeah, on an operational level, yes, but also on a conceptual level, on mission architecture, and what kind of sensors exist, what type of data that it generates, but keeping the end user in mind. That's
Okay.
what I go back to is, we are going to generate this type of data in our company, and then those satellites that are coming up from public institutions, which are going to be free, are going to be this. And if you keep the end customer in mind, at least today, the end customer just goes back to what's available for free. Let's see what we can do with it. And I think today the prices are also not helping, because the prices have not gone down as much as it should be, that, that it's almost marginal for them. It's not yet, but it's still quite high, especially if you're looking at high resolution. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it. Is you need to give them a reason to purchase your data, and the public data can help them find that reason. And that's kind of how the way the private companies need to sell is, yes, you can get that from Sentinel data, but we can do this on top of it, especially if you're trying to solve a problem. And I've seen that happen with a couple of customers. Is they landed on, okay, we have to use this commercial company because the Sentinel resolution or frequency in terms of revisit is not good enough. And they realized it because they have figured out what they can do. And then now they're going to go and buy from the commercial company 100%, because they know why they need to go and do it. And if that talking between these two parties exist, from a problem solving point of view, okay, this problem can be solved by this and this, and even you can even go ahead and pitch that. I see that happening with GHG sat a little bit. I've seen that happening recently, is with the Sentinel 5B emission satellites, you can spot emissions on a high level, but if you want to find out which factory it's actually emitting from, you need to come to us. So the value proposition actually stems from what is out there and then what we can offer. So it helps problem solving, because at the end of the day, customers are trying to solve a problem. They are not looking at what type of data it is.
Yeah.
They are not looking at what resolution, what revisit. They don't care. That's not how you should go as a starting point, right? That makes customers imagine how they can apply the solution to their problem. Instead, you should kind of pitch as a solution.
Do you think that works with the incentives being so different from the private sector and the public sector? They might be tackling the same problems, but for very different reasons. So do you think that works out as well with those very different incentives?
Right now, no, because if you actually ask a few Earth observation companies in a few verticals, especially, who's your biggest competitor, they're going to actually name the public data, which is pretty interesting, because they're trying to tackle, okay, how can we get ahead of them in some markets? I'm not saying in all markets and for all customers, but for some customers, it's definitely you don't want that. You don't want the public competing with the private, and it's not happening everywhere, but in some markets it's definitely happening, and the incentives don't work out. So and I like what ESA is doing with its EarthNet program, for instance. You give although it's for researchers, it's not commercial. It gives everybody access to different types of data. You can use whatever data you want. You can use from ISA, you can use from other commercial companies if you want. And at the end of the day, it leaves the decision to the user, and the user then picks it, or in this case, the researcher picks it. But when it comes to commercially speaking, you also want to incentivize, let's say users or future entrepreneurs to mix different types of data, because the public institutions wants to push the usage of its data because they need to keep the program going for political reasons, and the private companies want to make people use their data for their own revenues. And yeah, right now the talking does not happen as much as it should, but I know that's changing. At least on a European level, it's changing quite a bit, based on what we know from how let's say the European Commission is looking at the European Green Deal, and how Earth observation data can help there. Copernicus being a part of it, other companies being a part of it. At the end of the day, it has a problem to solve. And the problem is different challenges of the European Green Deal. And it's looking at where Copernicus can play a part. Realistically speaking, it can't monitor emissions, for instance, every day. You can do that every few days with the Copernicus program, but you need to go to a commercial source for, if you really need to implement a Green Deal tool, you need to include commercial. So, the talking is already starting to happen. So
right. Yeah.
What was missing was the talking. I think they were going in different direction, but then they realized, oh shit, we're trying to solve the same problem.
That's actually quite interesting, because it sounds like the same problem that the kind of more hardware launcher side of things has, where these conversations are also starting, where it's like realizing that you're actually not really competing. It sounds like they're doing the same, like you're doing the same thing, like you're taking images of the Earth or you're sending satellites up to space. But it turns out that there's like such a wide diversity of things to do that there's room for having like multiple people doing multiple things and having nearly multiple business models. So it's actually quite interesting to see that seems to be, at least to me, there seems to be this same issue when you listen to ULA and SpaceX talking about like what are the different value propositions, or something like Ariane's Space, and how all of these interact. It sounds like we're just seeing the same thing, like once it's in the sky again. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same thing on the telecom and satcom side of things as well.
Satcom is, I think, kind of commercialized very well.
It's
I think people, I don't know why they wouldn't like to admit it in space, and they keep talking about the launcher, but the biggest revenue generating market is, I always feel like launch try to get a lot of attention, but then the biggest revenues come from telecommunications. I know that launch is enabling telecommunications, but well, it has started to kind of come back again because of the broadband talks. But it is, SpaceX is 74 billion because they are a telecommunications company who can launch. Not because they're a launch company.
I would not be surprised if the biggest reason is the cool factor, how cool launchers are. I studied aerospace mechanical engineering, so literally how to build rockets. And one of the problems was everybody wanted to go in propulsion. Everybody wanted to build the engines, which is, the coolest part of the coolest thing, which is the rocket. And I would not be surprised if that is also why it just gets much more attention, because it's just much more cool.
And that's why you need to have like more people get into launch, because there are a lot of problems to solve. Like knowing when different launch dates are available. If you're a satellite operator, where is the booking.com for launch? I think you need to kind of have like software guys come in, because you need to have a booking.com for launch. If you're a satellite operator, do you want to maintain an Excel database of different launch dates from different places, different prices? Well, price is a different conversation. I don't know if it's standardized yet. It's not like advertisable on a website. It's
just like EO.
yeah, exactly. It's still, done via email. But, those are all ideas that can only come from outside. I don't think it can come from within, because like you said, the aerospace engineers, some of them maybe, the minority might want to work on problems like these, but the majority, they're going to work on the next big thing in propulsion, I would imagine.
Yeah. No, it's
same with EO. Sorry, just to finish the analogy, I think the biggest EO people are going to work on which, let's say, how do you do this better? How can you improve the accuracy of this? Or you're not going to see them developing the big software product that I'm talking about, like a lot of companies that are there in my insights as a service layer. I was just looking at it like curiously, what their backgrounds are, the founders' backgrounds. Not a lot of them are actually remote sensing scientists or EO specialists. They come from outside. They have either industry experience, they have software experience, and then they figure out, what, I need to build a software product with this and try to sell these insights to companies. And that's why it's interesting to have people from outside coming in.
I think the more I progress in my career and just in life in general, I think there's value in tackling the boring problem. Like, because you have much less competition, nobody wants to do it. And it doesn't get talked about that much. But if you can tackle and solve the boring problem, there's a huge value that you can generate there. But you just need to find a way to make it cool for yourself to solve it. And I think it applies to a lot of different things. Like in Earth observation, there's all these, like, there's a huge focus about, oh, how do we apply machine learning and all that stuff, and like you were saying, the algorithms, or for space, how do we do the launchers? But then there's all these smaller, well, at least they sound smaller problems, like exactly how do you make all the planning fit? How do you standardize how you can get customers for launch? If you can find a way to solve those problems that don't get much attention, I think you can create like a huge value, and we're kind of under the radar as well, because
exactly. And Skywatch comes to mind. What Skywatch is doing, I mean, I'm not saying they're working on a boring problem, but they're not sending satellites up, which in EO is the coolest thing to do. And they're not working on a product to solve a problem in a specific vertical. Their product is, let's combine all of the data in one platform and Earth cache, and let's give customers a way to task different satellites in one platform, and that's their next product, right? So it's super boring. And I think if you pitch this in an EO competition, their product, they wouldn't even get honorable mention if you're giving out prizes, because the ones who are trying to solve, I'm going to detect a truck from Sentinel-2, yeah, you're number one. But they're the ones who have they've raised more money now, and that's kind of because their problem is also more understandable for the outside world, I think, than a company that is working on the next super resolution algorithm. I know of a couple of them, and they are finding it very hard to kind of convey what they're trying to build to an outside investor. So it's interesting to see how your companies evolve and what kind of companies come in. And I'm sure there are a lot of boring problems, and I think if you find more boring problems, you're kind of golden, because it's very easy to pitch, and you can say your market is not limited to building satellites or selling products. You can solve a bunch of different things. But yeah, interesting stuff.
I want to completely switch gears, and I'd like to ask you, you come from India, from what I gathered, and I want to ask you if you're following.
You can hear it as well sometimes.
I'd like to ask you if you're following what's happening over there, and I know nothing about the. First of all, ISRO, an Indian Space Agency, I barely know what they're doing. I know they're doing some launches, but I don't know, for example, how the whole Earth observation situation is there. In terms of applications as well, I think you've mentioned that, and it gets mentioned hopefully more and more, that things don't transfer very well everywhere in the world. And I think when we think about data, we think about these big US cities or Europe, but the access to data is probably very different in India. And so I just wanted to kind of ask you if you are following kind of the scene of just Earth observation in India, and what might be your thoughts about how things are going.
I think the simple answer is they are leapfrogging in terms of how Earth observation is being adopted. So they are not, and I know of a couple of companies that are, developing products. I like to say, there are three ways of doing EO. Foreground EO, where you see, okay, EO is used and you kind of go on with it. And then there's the middle ground EO, where you kind of know, but then you focus on the inside. And then there's the background EO, where you have no clue there's EO involved. And India is kind of, when I said leapfrogging, that's kind of what I mean, is they are leapfrogging into products that are using EO that you wouldn't imagine. People are going into, let's take loan payback as an example. Banks are using EO data to find out which part of the city which part of the city has people where, they're paying more payback loans, and, they're conveying it to insurance companies. And they're kind of using it within the background, but EO data is being used by a couple of companies that I know for banking, insurance, credits, not credit, like loan credit, agriculture, of course, emissions. And it's being used in ways that I couldn't imagine, because, I've been here for 7 years, and I've kind of, in my mind, said, okay, this is how EO needs to be adopted. But there it's being adopted in a completely different way. And it's no surprise, because that's a completely different market, and they have very different use cases. And they're also focusing on, let's say, the end product, and not so much on the data. So from a whole EO adoption scene, that's kind of how I see it being used. Although, to be fair, it has not been very, as much as in the West, clearly, because, we didn't have access to the data. And now, because of a new regulation, we will start to have access to more data. And you have one commercial company, that's Pixel, that's going to generate data. And then there's, the public data as well, which is going to be accessible by people. So we can see a lot more, let's say, startups coming out that are, making use of that data. So that's probably expected in the next few years, especially after the regulation. Up to now, I think up to 1 meter resolution, if I'm not mistaken, can be sold and, adopted within the users, which was not possible before. So now I think a lot more people are going to start to use data. And, the best thing with India, I say India's USP is, not a company or anything. It's just people. I think just have a lot of them, and young ones. So more so than China itself. So there's definitely going to be, and the most amount of software engineers as well, if I might say. So I think that's why when I moved into EO, I was just thinking, why are we not like a superpower in EO? Because I don't think that you can find more data scientists in the world than you can find in India. So now that they are probably starting to realize that this is becoming available, I think we will probably find more companies come out that are making use of your data. Probably see more universities start to actively use that in their curriculum, which is kind of how you need to do a step-by-step introduction. Not to say there's nobody studying EO or remote sensing or anything like it, but it's going to happen on much more of a mainstream level, not just because you chose geoinformatics or remote sensing as your educational background, only then but now a lot more people will probably come to know. And that's a good thing, because at the end of the day, there's going to be more EO companies, more adoption of EO for mainstream use, not just institutional use. Even in institutions, I think there's a lot more use of EO data coming up because of the regulation recently. So, and also shameless plug, there's an episode on India coming up in my podcast. So we will,
cool.
Not just on EO, but just on overall Indian ecosystem for people who are interested. And in the future, maybe something around EO in India as well. So, I won't say that I know everything, but I know some things. Whatever I follow it, I'm not there. So, but I know of a few other startups that are in stealth mode, and they're working on some cool stuff, both on the hardware side, also on the software side. So a lot more to come. Space is just picking up in India, so to say. It's just been the last year or two when it's started picking up so much.
Do you see the same kind of ways of developing a company in India than you might have? First of all, I think it's quite different in the US and in Europe. There's like quite some differences of how people approach a problem and how just funding might work in general, and how people just their work as well. Do you see India having also is it a very similar model? Is it something that's very different? Do you think there's something else that it could bring to the table?
Yeah, I think the biggest things that I've noted is a lot of big startups in India. I think you can put them into two categories. One is they decided to adapt a solution that was working in the West to India. And those are one big type of companies, the big unicorns of India. So adapting, a solution from the outside for an Indian model. There's a company called Ola, which is the Uber for India, or the Uber of India. And they took Uber and then they applied it to India. So that's one type of startup. I don't see that type of startups happening in EO. Maybe it can be, but on the hardware side. But on the software side, I think the lot of focus of, the second category of startups, big startups in India, has been focusing on trying to solve a problem, a specific problem. And that's been the big companies. They have tried to solve very interesting problems that are very local. So localized problem solving. And that's where I think a lot of EO companies can be in India in the future, because there's a lot of types of problems that are specific to India, which is a huge market anyway, that can also be applied to a lot of developing countries. And Satsure is a startup that I know, and that's a company that is solving a problem that's very localized, because let's say banks are more open to adoption of digital technologies in India and in the developing world, more so than in Europe. I don't want to offend any banks or people working in banks and your listeners, but they tend to be, that's what, the developing country mentality is. Africa used mobile banking before Europe or the US did, because, that's kind of how technologies are adopted. And I think Indian, let's say, big corporations are more adopting to digital technologies, EO being one of them. And I've seen them being adopted much more. So I can definitely see a lot of startups coming in that direction, trying to solve a specific local problem that is applied to India or some developing countries, and then try to solve them locally.
No, yeah, that's super interesting. So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is there might be less legacy in the banking system as well. That makes it easier to adopt what's kind of changing here. To take your example of mobile banking in places in Africa, just to me, it sounds like it's just you don't have all this huge legacy that you can have in places like the West, that I've been doing this for hundreds of years and so have like a long way of doing it. That sounds like it would be a massive competitive advantage down the line in getting things started and maybe allowing for more risk taking in some of the entrepreneurial endeavors.
Yeah, and also, the thing is, because they are very problem based, they're probably going to start generating revenues. So you probably won't see big funding rounds coming from Indian startups because they don't need to, because they can just go and get revenues because they're actually solving a problem which a customer cares about. So maybe they would need a VC money when they want to scale up and go to all the developing countries. But if they're just trying to solve a problem with EO data, they can and they will, and they can just go ahead and do that, as long as they want to take that risk of starting a company, which is already always a risk, especially in developing countries. So if you have that cushion, and you won't kind of do that if you don't know that there's a customer waiting to pay. You know what I mean? So that kind of comes in with your risk-taking mentality. You don't want to take risks unless you're a rich person in India or a developing world. Most of us want to take risks if we know that this is something that's worth solving. Somebody is going to pay for this product. So I'd see that could probably happen a lot more. That there'll be much less focus on, this company raised funding, because the companies that are not raising funding are actually getting money from the customers directly and just growing like that, which is also a nice way to grow, right?
Yeah. I am actually always surprised and a little bit ashamed to just realize how little I know about what's going on in places like India, where especially I think, and I might just make a huge fool of myself, but I think English is very prominent in India as well, for historical reasons. So I'm actually quite surprised. Like in China, for example, the language is a huge barrier to kind of communicate, but yet with India and thinking that the language barrier would be lessened, I would have maybe naively expected to hear a lot more about what's going on. And for some reason, first of all, everything is very US centric. Even in Europe, it's like, wow, it's damn hard to hear about stuff. But do you have any idea why that might be also the case? Is it just that it's less about just uh, demonstrating what's going on, and less more doing, or is it just something completely different, or you also have no idea?
Well, I think it's just because of what people want to read. People write about things that people want to read. Even within the space community, I don't know how many people actually know a lot of things about what's going on with India, and it doesn't feature much in the news and things like that. And there's not much going on if you compare it to US or Europe, or China for that matter. Some stuff's going on, but yeah, when they become, let's say, prominent enough, they will be reported. I think that's kind of
Right.
my simple answer to that is not to say that there's nothing going on. There's some stuff going on which we actively go and look out for and read about, but more often than not, it's not what people want to read or want to know.
Okay.
So it's not done actively by whoever's in the media or the press.
Right. So actually, to go back to your to what you said earlier, you have a podcast. What a strange idea. Who would ever want to do something like that? So first of all, I look forward to hearing that episode centered more around India. And just asking for a friend, I'm very curious to know what pushed you to get started there. And if you could just, first of all, explain what you're doing. And then I'd be actually quite curious to know what got you started on that.
Okay, well, it's something. Well, my podcast, first of all, it's called TerraWatch Space, and it's a podcast that's focusing overall on the space industry, and I'm going to be finishing up my first season soon, which is all about different domains of space. Each episode focused on different domains of space, and then the next season is going to be on EO. So
okay, nice.
Fully focused on Earth observation and just talking to different people on Earth observation. So how it came to my mind is just first, I had a lot of time in my hands because I am an independent consultant and I don't have a full-time job, and I can choose to work when I want. So I have some time. So I decided that I could do this. But the reason that I started was I realized that there was a lot of stuff going on in the space industry, and there was a lot of chaos in terms of how everything is done, and I just wanted to see if I can put some structure to it, but obviously with some compromises. It's that's why my episodes are on different domains. If you want to listen to launch, you go to an episode. If you want about Earth observation, you go to an episode of Earth observation, the first one that I recorded. And yeah, I just wanted to bring some, let's say, some structure, because I saw a lot of podcasts that were there, and they were all about space, and they were also not focusing on the commercial side of it. That was the second reason. So lack of structure was first, and the second side was commercial stuff. That a lot of people who are listening to my podcast, well, it's not hundreds of thousands, but still, they are all listening for the same reason that I'm interested in space, is more on the commercial side of it. Yes, black holes are cool, or yes, Mars is cool, which is a lot of podcasts focus on those. They are great podcasts, but then some, let's say, professionals also want to look at it from a commercial side. So I decided to make that, let's say, one of my central points. Is when I'm focusing on these domains, I'm not going to, even get into the technicalities of what are the different types of propulsion, or what is different type of sensors, things like that. I just wanted to get the commercial side of things. And yeah, I think I was also interested in how the industry was growing from a commercial point of view, to understand where the opportunities are. If you're an investor, where can you invest? Or if you're someone looking for a job in the space industry, or wanting to get into the space industry, you need to kind of understand. You already know that Mars is cool, and rockets are cool, and you probably can study your own thing about the technology or the science. But then the commercial side is very subjective, and I think you need to pay either reports of hundreds of euros or thousands of euros, or you can do that. So, and the last thing that I decided when I started to do the podcast was I wanted to do it in a way that 2016, when I moved to the space industry, if I had liked to have one resource, what I would have liked to have.
Right.
That was kind of my, I would say, the driving force behind.
Okay.
When I sit and edit my podcast, it's like, oh, why am I doing this? That's the question that I kind of answer myself. It's like, okay, somebody might find it useful, and thankfully, some people have found it useful. So that rewarding thing is already happening, thankfully.
Right. Yeah, that's where you get it wrong. Why are you editing your podcast?
Yeah. What am I doing with my life? Yeah.
No, but I think that's a really great approach, because I think there's spaces still viewed by some as this very pure thing. In like, we don't want capitalism to take over this beautiful endeavor that is, human exploration. And I think a lot of people still feel very strongly about that, about like, it's all about the kind of, dreamy side of things, which is, I think, amazing. That's why a lot of us get into that. Like you were mentioning earlier about Interstellar. When you see these stuff, you're like, this is just so amazing. And a lot of people study that because kids have rockets in their bedroom. They don't have microwaves. People want to work on these super exciting stuff, and it makes people dream. And I don't want to take away that, but I think it is still seen as this thing where, we don't want space tourism. We don't want people bringing in the money. We don't want like all of that. And I think, well, first of all, it's changing, and it has to. I think if we want it to grow anyways, like, you have to bring in the money. That's just how things work, I think, today. So I do think that's a great value that you can add there about bringing this thing, and also maybe just demystifying it. It makes it maybe more understandable. And I'm a big believer in conversations like these, and I hope that can also maybe change people's minds about when you take the time to listen to someone and understand why they're doing it. It's not all mean and money. So that sounds like a great reason to get started on that. And it is a great podcast, by the way. I think people should go check it out if they haven't.
If you're interested in space, yeah, definitely. I don't know. I mean, not a lot of people are interested in the podcast, right? So, it's the reality.
Yeah, well, it also depends about, like, that's why I think it's also, you have to ask those questions about what you're trying to do. Not so many people listen to this one either. That does mean, at least I get a lot of value out of it. You also write quite a bit. What is that just a different medium, or do you see it like as a way to talk about different things? Because I just think it's really interesting to also, it's a different way to put your ideas out there. And so I kind of wanted to ask a bit the same question about what got you to start writing, and how do you choose the stuff you write about?
Well, I think what started the writing was confinement. So that was last year when I started writing. It's like, I had a lot of thoughts and I didn't know what to do with it. And then confinement happened, and suddenly you had a lot of time because you didn't have to. At that time, I was living in Paris, so I didn't have to commute for 2.5 hours. So, hey, I have 2.5 hours extra per day. So that really was a major factor when I started writing. And well, I wouldn't like to say I'm like, I like to write, and I'm a writer and thoughts that come to me, but it's just some ideas. There are some thoughts, and if I think about a thought for a lot of time, then I decide to write about it because it's just been there in my head for a while. And those, I think, I view writing. Podcasting is more about more on the education, not at education, a little bit of conversation, but solely focused on educating people. So I ask all the dumb questions because those are I wouldn't say dumb questions, but dumb questions for the space industry, but actual questions for people outside
Yeah.
the space bubble. So that's what I do on the podcast. So I don't get to go into the details. So in the writing, I think I try and go into the details a little bit. But again, it's very occasional. I've tried to normalize and standardize it, but I've realized that I'm not that type of writer. I can only
Right.
write when I have something to write about. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to and I've run out of things to write, like I said. But I need to kind of get that idea in my head and decide to see if it's worth writing. And I think I think too much sometimes. Sometimes I just have to kind of lash out my thoughts and write about. But no, writing is more of let's get into something and view it and give my perspectives, give my thoughts. Sometimes it's more on a educational note as well, educational / evangelizing note as well. Sometimes it's just more of a rant of, oh, why is the industry so bad? Why is things not working out?
Right.
Why are we still using FTP server for sending data? What's
Oh
wrong
God,
with
if anybody knows.
Yeah. Well, I know of a couple of companies which did use FTP until quite a while ago to send some data. So, so it's like, oh my God. And why is building a tasking interface a huge achievement? It's like
Yeah.
it should be there from the very beginning. Having an interface where you can see when your satellite passes through an area of interest should be there from the very beginning. That's more of a rant. So some articles is more of a rant. Yeah.
Right. Cool. I want to finish this by asking if you might have any books that you like and that you might recommend, not necessarily about EO, just about anything in general. Is there anything that
I
comes to
don't think
mind?
I've read any books on EO, so I am basically the worst, let's say, person in EO who has not read any books, has not took a course, but I still write about EO. So, read everything that I write with care, with a lot of warning and attention, because I am not an expert. No, nothing about EO. I can say books. Well, off the top of my head, I think Yuval's Brief History of Humankind, Sapiens. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of changed the way I think a lot. I think it
Yeah.
inspired me to think very much on the big picture, because the whole book is about the big picture. So it influenced a lot of my thinking on the big picture. And there is When Breath Becomes Air, which is a book
Mm-hmm.
about I forgot the name of the author, but When Breath Becomes Air, that's a book about when it's more about mortality and passion, what you do with your life and things like that. It's someone's memoir
Yeah.
he wrote before he died. So that's a really nice book. Comes to my mind. And the third book that comes to my mind is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I think the conversation is going in a completely different direction because I'm giving you books that are not technical at
No, but
all. And they're all
that's
like,
it. This comes back full circle to what I was asking at the very beginning. It's like it's not just about the EO stuff. It's also about just people in general and
okay.
so it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
why
yeah, no. And then
I
third one is
find it really
Meditations then.
interesting to know
Mm-hmm.
what people go to, and because we might all kind of converge towards the same thing, but there's also so many different ways where we diverge.
Sure.
And so I find books to be quite a relatable manner.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, no, it's a very interesting thing. And a side story is I had the same hypothesis of, people who like the same books will become friends. And that was my first startup idea, which I worked on, but it failed. But that's a startup idea that I worked on. It's more like Tinder for books, if you will. Yeah.
Oh, that actually sounds pretty cool.
So I didn't go on with it, but that was a different life. I was doing
Mm.
something completely different back then. And this was more of a side project that I explored and got some investment. And then, it didn't pick up as much as I expected.
Yeah, I think there's the one thing that I find really interesting is how we don't have, like, different media have different recommendation systems. like Netflix and all the other platforms, they have they figured out a way how to recommend movies. YouTube has figured out a way how to recommend videos. Spotify has figured out a way where you recommend music. But then books, it's like maybe there's Goodreads, but
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a thing where you go get book recommendations. And podcast, I think, is still very similar, where it's very word of mouth. It's like, oh, I heard these cool things, and it feels very archaic still, in a way,
I know.
quote marks. So I would be curious to see if someone actually does come up.
I think
With
Amazon does a pretty good job for both Amazon and Audible. I listen to some
That's
audiobooks
true.
sometimes, and they do a very good job of recommending. But I have to say, most of my book recommendations come from the Tim Ferriss show. So I listen to the Tim Ferriss
Right.
show, and
Yeah.
I listen to him and his guests, and that's already enough books that I can read in a year. So especially because they're all, most of them are in my area of interest. So, and I read more nonfiction. So there's a lot of nonfiction around there.
Cool. I think that's a great spot to end it. Thanks a lot for coming here and spending all that time talking about EO and your life with me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Max. This was very reflective and a lot of fun. Thank you.